I still remember the first time I downloaded Linux Mint on a computer and looking around thinking, wow, this looks so nice, so clean, and it's so easy to use. Every time someone asks me about Linux and open source software, I think of how I think of that moment. So I figured I'd make a little post about how I got to that point, how I got into using Linux. I'm not going to talk about what I enjoy about the open source community. I'm simply going to talk about how I got to where I am right now with the software or the Linux distributions, distros. The starting point for that is getting on iTunes, being bored, and looking into what a podcast is. I remember looking into podcasts and I found some IT podcasts, and one of the ones that jumped out more than the others were Podnuts. Podnuts has a lot of different podcasts, and the first one I think I came across was Computer Repair. They also had another one which was Podnuts Server Admin, something like that. It was Podnuts for the server admins, the system admins, and at one point I remember thinking to myself, all right, this guy has been talking about Red Hat Enterprise Linux for the last dozen episodes here and there, and I have no idea what he's talking about. I knew a little bit about Windows Server, but I knew nothing about Red Hat, and he got on my nerves. And he kept talking about Linux, Windows this, but Linux this. So I figured, I'm gonna check this out because I'm getting out the military. I'm moving into the civilian world. I'll need to find some type of specialty. I want to do something that's different. I want to travel the less traveled path. I'm gonna check out this Linux thing. So what I ended up doing was coming across Podnuts Linux for the Rest of Us, which is it's a sub podcast to Podnuts, and people were talking about Linux and all these different cool things with open source software. And at one point I remember the main host saying something about he had this thing against Linux Mint. He would talk about Linux Ubuntu versus Linux Mint here and there, and because I like to look into things that people don't really like to look into or people really crap on, I decided I'm gonna look into both of them, but I'm really curious about what he has so much against Linux Mint. So I checked them out, and I remember there were some spare computers. I took one and I put Linux Mint on one of Linux Mint Cinnamon, and Cinnamon would be the desktop environment or the overall appearance as to how the operating system looks, the GUI, and it looked very similar to Windows. There was a little extra in the start menu or programs menu, but it was really nice, clean, easy to look at, easy to navigate. And there was another spare computer that I had. I decided to put Linux Zorin on that, and that was more looking around on distrowatch.com, another website that I found through Linux for the Rest of Us, where you can look up any Linux distribution or browse through categories of Linux distributions. Solaris and BSD are up there as well. You want to look into these things while I'm saying it. Red Hat is on redhat.com. Simple. You can look out Linux Mint on linuxmint.com, and you can look up Linux Zorin on zorinos.com, zorinos.com. And looking at Zorin and Mint, both of them look pretty decent. Zorin had a lot of fancy stuff going on, and me being simple, I wasn't really big into that at the time. I just wanted something that was stable, and Linux Mint seemed to do everything I needed. And I downloaded a couple other ones later, but Kali, Linux Kali at kali.org, Kali, which is more for pen testers or penetration testers or hackers, script kiddies, guys that get really big into cyber security. That's big for them. That's their thing. There was also Proteus.org or Proteus.org. I don't remember much about that one. Just remember looking at it. And then it was Peppermint OS, Linux Peppermint. I think I tried to put that on the computer, and these are busted old computers, mind you. This was, I think I tried Linux Mint and Linux Zorin on some old bulky HP workstation laptop that was easily about as wide as my torso. When you turn it on, it sounds like an airplane about to take off. Thing's about 6 pounds. And I tried to put Proteus on a Dell C700 something. This is an old, really old computer. It was so old, there was no Ethernet port. That's how old it is, I think. Yeah, there was no Ethernet. It had a RJ11 or a telephone port. So after playing around with those, I decided I was gonna back up my Windows, my primary computer, which was Windows at the time, because at the time I wasn't doing anything that I knew I'd need to worry about. And I had played around with Linux Mint on the extra computer, my other computer, and there was LibreOffice, there was GIMP, so word processing, PowerPoint, Excel, editing photos, that's the basics. Thunderbird was up there, which I didn't even use an email client at the time, so I wasn't worried too much about that. But I decided I was gonna back up my computer, my Windows computer, my primary, and once I backed it up, I wiped it with, I believe I was using Ultimate Boot CD that early. I'm not sure. May have been something else, but Ultimate Boot CD is awesome. I would recommend anybody check that out. I used that to wipe the computer, and then I installed Linux Mint 32-bit, Linux Mint Cinnamon on my primary computer. Put everything up there, and I really enjoyed it. I kept listening to Podnut's Linux for the Rest of Us. I listened to all of those podcasts throughout the rest of the year, and I'm not sure if I've said this, but I'm talking about 2015. Maybe I should say that. Maybe I should have said that first. I'm talking about everything from 2015. 2015. I'll leave that as that. I'm listening to all the Podnuts Linux for the Rest of Us episodes, and I'm learning about all this stuff going on with open source software, Linux, how to make the most out of it. I'm enjoying it because everything's free, everything's different. I'm learning so much. I'm being exposed to so many things without having to look for it. You know, it was really interesting. I stayed on Linux Mint for 4 to 5 months before I decided to take the leap to start distro hopping and trying something else out. And what happened was, I believe, I'm not sure, but I think I went from Mint to Deepen. I believe I went from Mint to Deepen or Linux Kali. And no, I think I went to Kali. Oh well, I went to Kali, didn't want to keep it up there because of all the extra stuff that I knew I was going to touch on a regular basis. And I believe at that point I went to Deepen, Linux Deepen, DEEPIN.org. I played with that for about a month. It's really nice. It's also based on Debian and Ubuntu, just like Mint is. And it had a really nice HTML5 look from what I remember. It was very polished. It was originated in China. Really nice. After a month of that, I think I decided I was going to jump to CentOS. So imagine backing up all my data, wiping the computer again, putting CentOS on it, putting my data back on it, realizing I don't like the way this operating system works or looks. You know, CentOS doesn't use the same commands, the exact same commands as Ubuntu or Debian. So when something happened, I had to go look up what is a yum and yum install, a lot of things I had to figure out. Certain software that I wanted to use and got used to at that time, I didn't know how to find that for CentOS. So after about a week or two, I realized, well, I came to the conclusion that CentOS is meant for a server. I'd be better off putting this on a VM or virtual machine, play with it later on, but I want something that I can be productive with now. So I went back to Deepen, Linux Deepen, and got comfortable with it. They were using, instead of LibreOffice, like Linux Mint were using, they had WPS. And WPS is, instead of having the Visio alternative and the database alternative in LibreOffice, the LibreOffice suite, WPS is simply a Word document, it's a word processor, presentation creator, and spreadsheet manager. That's it. But it's really nice and elegant. It's nice to use, especially since they have tabs. It keeps everything in the same window. Look really nice. But overall, I didn't want to keep Deepen for the long haul. So after a while, I decided I was gonna. I think I had done a video, a YouTube video for how to use it. A couple things I wrote about it, and I decided I want to try something different. Well, I was in a class at this time, and we had to come up with an idea. Well, we had the option to come up with an idea for creating a product or creating a business. And my idea ended up being a Linux operating system for students. For those of you that have time dealing with Linux, I didn't know Ubuntu existed. I didn't know that was even a thing. But a couple weeks afterwards, I found something on DistroWatch, and it was Uber Student, Linux Uber Student at uberstudent.org, uberstudent.org. And I really liked it. It was very simple look, but its start menu was deep with so many different web apps and links to productive software, websites. There was a lot of good stuff up there, all tailored to helping the college student or the student in general, the school student. High school students could even use it. Everything there was dedicated to helping a student do things in a much more efficient way. There were different alternatives for different ways for calculators. There were note-taking apps. There were ways for collaborating and organizing your notes. That's how I found Cherry Tree, which I'll have a video on soon. It's an alternative to Evernote and OneNote. It had a lot of things up there, and I kept that up there for about 2 to 3 months, and that brought me into 2016 before I started to use some other things, which I'll talk about on another time. I learned a lot during that time. I also found Anti-X because I had bought a Asus EEE, little small netbook that's about the size of a little bit bigger than the size of my hand or so, put two together or something. It's a netbook, small. And I put Linux Anti-X on it. I think I'm pronouncing that right. If you want to look at it, it's Anti-X, antix.mepis.org, antics.mepis.org, if you want to check that out. Linux Anti-X is a very scaled down Linux operating system for use on older computers and netbooks, and it works very well. I used it in class for taking notes, and it was easy to carry around, easy to use. It just worked. Throughout the year 2015, the biggest websites, I gotta go down a list. There was a lot of websites that taught me a lot of things all the time with all the reading and YouTube videos. The first one on the list would be opensource.com. Opensource.com, even today, I'm always interested to see what they write up there. I can't wait to get the chance to write for them. TechSupportAlert.com or Gizmo's Freeware. If you look both of them up, you'll come to the same website. They make a lot of quick reviews or info posts about software for Linux, Windows, Mac, whatever, phones, they do it all. And every once in a while, it's always good to be able to go to the Linux tab and see what they had up there. There was also alternative2.net, where at some point I decided, I'm gonna look into doing everything with open source software. So let's say I want to see what can I make music with that's open source. Well, I'll type in Fruity Loops Studio, and LMMS would come up, Q Tractor, Ardor would come up, osalt.com, what was it, open source alternatives, yeah, osalt.com was another good one. The free introduction to Linux course on edX, on edx.org, there's a free course for Linux created by Linux Foundation, which is the hub. It's a hub of the Linux world. The name of the course is Introduction to Linux. It's a free course. It's very informational. They go into a lot with the command line, the GUI. It's a great way to start learning. That course helped me a lot. There was also one on cybrary.it, or cybrary.it. It was a great Linux Plus course. I'm not going to say it will prepare you for taking the certification, but it is a good way of getting your feet wet and getting an understanding of it. That course taught me a lot though. Another ones are Noobs Lab, or NOOBS Lab.com. They have a lot of good tutorials and how-tos. Linux Nix, LinuxNix.com is another one. Xfoss, ITSFoss.com. That's another great one. TechMint, TECMint.com. Great, another one that's good. Unixmen, UNIXMEN.com is another good one. It Runs on Linux. It's not one I use often, but I keep it in the bookmarks. Mintcast, a lot of people don't know. Even people that use Linux Mint may not know. There's the Mintcast, the podcast for Linux Mint and free open source software at mintcast.org, and linuxscoop.com. Those are some pretty good stuff in there. So that entire list of websites was those are the ones that helped me get to where I am right now. And of course, I'm learning plenty more now, because keep in mind, I'm talking about what I've learned a little bit of what I've learned in 2015. I'm just talking about the operating systems I learned in 2015. And by the time you hear this, it'll be way past the end of 2015. But I started off with listening to Podnuts, hearing someone talk about Red Hat Enterprise Linux for servers, and then bouncing over to Linux for the rest of us. Ended up using Linux Mint because someone was downing Ubuntu, and now I don't like the way Ubuntu looks. I just do not like Ubuntu's I don't like its desktop environment. The way it looks, I don't really care much for it. But yeah, I love Linux Mint. Then I went to Linux Zorn for a short time, and then CentOS, Linux Deepen, and Uber Student. A little bit on Backbox and Linux Kali. A lot of bouncing around for 2015. 2016, not too much of that. I'll talk about that in another little rant. But I enjoyed playing around with all these different Linux operating systems. Can't wait to keep doing it. I'm looking forward to doing more, learning more, sharing that information alongside and with the help of the other websites that I mentioned. If you got questions at any time, you can always email me, jtspratly@golivlively.com, jtspratly@linux.com, jtspratly@golivlively.com, or at linux.com. They both come right to me. That's right, I have an actual linux.com account. That's awesome. I think I'm bragging. I'm enjoying it. You can always check out my YouTube channel. I'll be doing plenty of other things also. Those are my Linux efforts for 2015. And there's going to be a lot more for 2016. Go live lively.